So for today's 31 Nights, I thought I'd do my top 5 Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes. This is a list slash ranking that I meant to do back in for the second year of 31 Nights, but unfortunately ended up setting it aside. Anyway, let's get started, I guess. Number 5. The Tale of the Unfinished Painting. In terms of dreamlike quality and atmosphere, this is a pretty good episode. It also proves to be very well directed. It follows a young girl named Cody who is struggling to find any inspiration to draw and is afraid her work might not be good enough. So she stumbles into an art gallery where a mysterious woman gives her a chance to work on a painting that was never finished. As the episode progresses, though, she discovers some strange things going on with the paintbrushes and some of the paintings themselves. And when another girl who was working on a painting there mysteriously vanishes, Cody realizes the sinister intentions the owner of the gallery has for her. This episode is just fantastic in terms of direction. There's some excellent dreamlike visuals, a very haunting, yet somehow tranquil background score, and some very otherworldly atmosphere. The scenes in the gallery always felt as though the gallery was cut off from the world. The shades are always drawn, and come to think of it, I didn't really see much windows, and it just felt so isolated due to the minimum amount of people there. Also, if you are someone who has struggled with writer's block, then you'll understand the struggle Cody has when she doubts herself and her work, which is something I've done to myself when struggling to feel inspired. But this episode makes a point on how inspiration is something that comes naturally and when you are not expecting it, and it isn't just something that can be acquired. You see, Cody started to work on the painting due to the lack of inspiration, but the thing is she gets over it eventually, which serves as another reminder that writer's block will, although it might be a while, eventually go, and inspiration will come naturally to you. Overall, very good episode. Anyway, on to number 4. And now for my number 4 favorite episode, The Tale of the Dollmaker. This was an episode, like Unfinished Painting, that didn't try too hard to scare you, yet still managed to be fairly effective in terms of horror. It follows a young girl named Melissa traveling to the countryside to stay with her relatives for the weekend. Now, Melissa gets very bored there due to the lack of entertainment at her aunt and uncle's house, but that soon changes when she meets Susan, and the two grow very close. But recently, Susan has mysteriously disappeared without any trace, which prompts Melissa to try and find out what happened to her friend, only to discover that her friend's fate might not be anything like what she imagined. A lot of the horror in this seems to come mainly from the atmospheric tone. In fact, the background score has this very mellow feel to it that serves as a good contrast to the horrors on screen, as well as the surprisingly raw and very emotional performances, especially the scene where Melissa's aunt tells her the truth about Susan. You can just see how devastated she is for Susan and her parents, and you could just hear it in her voice. It even shakes a bit as if she's about to cry. Hell, she's probably been scared of something like this happening to Melissa ever since it happened. But like with MLP, this episode also deals with themes concerning the magic of friendship and how powerful it is, since Melissa shows a growing determination to find her friend, even when things get risky, which gives you a really good idea of how close they are as friends, since Melissa does anything she can to save her friend, and doesn't give up until she does. It just serves as a really good tale about friendship as well, while still having a very suspenseful storyline. This episode also taps into the horrors of child vanishing, since you really get an idea of how much Susan's vanishing is affecting her folks. You see, they literally just up and left and didn't even take anything because, in the words of Melissa's aunt, there was just too many memories that were in the house that they just couldn't take it anymore, so they just had to go. This episode also demonstrates how scary it would truly be to be cut off from the world, to be trapped in a place where your safety isn't exactly the top priority, and the worst fate imaginable is waiting you. And no matter how hard you try, nobody can hear your screams for help, and the escape just seems out of the question. And on top of that, You're forced to just watch life go on while you, possibly, are trapped forever. There is also some really clever ideas in this episode as well. Anyway, let's move on to my number 3 pick. Number 3, The Tale of the Dead Man's Float. Look, I understand people would have put this episode higher, but it did make top 3, so there's that. Anyway, it follows a nerdy high school kid named Zeke who decides to teach his tsundere crush, Clarice, not Starling, about chemistry to help bring her grade up, in exchange for teaching him how to swim. And they decide to use a pool the two of them recently discovered that has been sealed off from the school for a very long time. When they begin their lessons, however, they find that an aggressive unseen menace is lurking within the bottom of the pool, and discover that this menace has been the cause of multiple drownings at the school, which is what got it closed down the pool closed down to begin with. Now, teaming up with the janitor, the two team up to stop the homicidal zombie and prevent it from hurting anyone in the future. This is the episode everyone remembers being the scariest, and I can definitely see why. Swimming already puts you in a vulnerable enough position due to the possibility of drowning, but throwing an unseen beast in there that will sneak up on you and pull you in only adds to how anxious the situation would truly be. And like I said, it is invisible, so you have no idea it's making its way towards you until it's too late. Oh, and bonus points for this episode for having the balls to kill some characters off, since it truly did add to the horror by showing how ruthless this thing truly is. But the best part of this episode is the overall design of the creature. I refuse to even show you any images, since I just want you to go watch the episode just so you can see what an amazing job the costume designers did. Also, surprisingly graphic monster design for this show. And now, it's time for the last 2 episodes on this ranking. The Tale of the Shiny Red Bicycle. Holy shit, the images I'm choosing are such poor quality. Anyway, this is one of the more mature episodes of the series, since it deals with some pretty serious topics for the show. Specifically that of death causation guilt, where an individual feels as though they could have done something to prevent someone's passing despite it being beyond their control. Self-blame, and death. It centers on a young kid named Mike Buckley who is struggling with the tragic death of his best friend Ricky. The accident happened long ago, but Mike still feels he might have had a hand in it due to thinking that he could have done more to prevent his death. So he's been dealing with a lot of self-blame because of it, and therefore having to bear a lot of regret. It even gets to the point where he is having dreams of the event happening, which just shows how affected he truly is by it. It definitely helped give some good layering to Mike's character and just develops him tremendously. Now, eventually Mike starts to get visited by Ricky's ghost, and he starts to believe that he has come back for revenge, for not doing enough to save him. This episode tackles its themes tremendously, since you really do get an idea of how traumatic this event was for Mike and the guilt he feels for not saving Ricky, since he keeps telling himself throughout the episode that he could have done more. Eventually, Mike confronts Ricky for haunting him, and while I won't spoil much here, the confrontation does give Mike a chance to forgive himself, and it is legitimately touching to watch, since he is finally able to let go of the guilt that was weighing him down for so long. Just a very touching episode that managed to have some surprisingly creepy imagery. This episode will also be good for anyone who enjoys the Toy Train episode of R.L. Stine's The Haunting Hour. You'll see why when you watch the episode. Anyway, before we move on to my number 1 pick, I'm going to go over some honorable mentions. First honorable mention, The Tale of the Curious Camera. This episode is pretty dark when you think about it, since it deals with someone who is given the power to destroy, and decides to use it to their own advantage. Hell, the camera is almost treated as if it's some kind of firearm, which might as well be. I mean, it goes off when bumped, which is what causes some guns to be misfired. Hell, it even goes off by itself, like a gun being unintentionally discharged due to a stuck pin. The previous owner even had to keep it locked up, like how one does with a firearm. And the main character just treats it like a straight-up weapon. This episode is obviously the show's take on Say Cheese and Die, but I will admit it does do a little better in terms of suspense and build-up. It sadly, though, did not end up making this list simply because I like these other episodes a little better, so I unfortunately ran out of room. The Tale of the Chameleons. This episode also proved to be really dark and even has a very grim ending to top things off. It centers on a girl who ends up getting bitten by a chameleon that eventually takes her form and plans to take her place. This episode tackles the idea of being replaced and having your identity stolen in a very creepy way. It's got some very cheesy special effects, but it manages to be pretty damn unnerving at times. Sadly, like with Curious Camera, and like 95% of the other honorable mentions, the episodes on this list I ended up liking more, so it sadly did not end up making the top 5 cut. The Tale of C7. This is another episode that I really wanted to try and put on this list that sadly did not end up making the top 5 ranking. It centers on a family moving into a new house only for the son to discover an old jukebox within it, which may be connected to strange events taking place around the house. This episode does have some very good storytelling, and it also has a great mystery going for it, as well as suspense that will keep you hooked. The Tale of Laughing in the Dark. Another episode that I really wanted to put on this list that sadly did not make the cut, which kind of disappointed me since this episode does a fantastic job of taking the less is more approach, which only added to the horror since it left so much to the imagination. But ultimately, the episodes on this list did end up sticking with me the most. Keep in mind, I'm not a 90s kid, so I didn't grow up with the show, just on the show. The Tale of the Ghastly Grinner. Another episode that sadly, while very good, was not as good as the episodes seen on this list. But this does manage to be pretty creepy, which the goofier moments of the episode help add to for some reason. I guess because of how contrasting it is. Anyway, this, in my opinion, is the Uncle Howie of Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes, since it balances out the zany, wacky moments and the more serious moments very well. It has a surprisingly menacing villain despite being a tad silly at times. Also, like with Uncle Howie, this episode also involves a character from a fictional world crossing into reality and causing mayhem. Hell, both main characters in these stories even get pulled into the world by the supernatural threat. Overall, a very fun and entertaining episode that still manages to be strikingly scary at times. Hell, even just the Ghastly Grinner's drawing on the front of the comic is unnerving to look at. The Tale of Station 109.1. Here we go with another episode that sadly ended up getting outranked by the episodes on this list. It follows a young boy obsessed with the idea of death who listens to an old radio in a hearse, where he discovers the titular station. He eventually tracks down the location of it and he meets a man named Roy, played by the late Gilbert Gottfried, who is under the impression the boy is dead and plans to send him to the afterlife, and refuses to believe he is alive and will not let him get out of being sent away. This episode also has a great performance on Gottfried's part. He is just such a riot to watch and, like with the Ghastly Grinner, managed to have some very unnerving moments to go along with it, despite how goofy his character got. Gottfried also did a good job of letting the viewer know Roy meant business while also balancing out the more silly moments in his performance. This episode is also pretty disturbing at times, and I just remember being so put off by it when I first saw it. I mean, there is a kid who is literally obsessed with the idea of death. Hell, he even has his room fashioned to look like a funeral home, complete with a wreath. It also is really good at making a point on how limited time we have on this earth and that eventually death will come. So it's best to leave behind a positive memory of yourself. Just a very heavy theme for the show and a good message overall. The Tale of the Crimson Clown. This is an episode I used to really like, and while I still like it, it sadly does not appeal to me as much. It follows a bratty little shit named Sam who ends up stealing the money for his mother's birthday present and spending it on a video game. When his brother finds out, he tells him about an evil clown doll named the Crimson Clown, who comes to life and goes after bad children. Big surprise, guess who shows up later? While this episode has some great horror mindfuckery and did have a nightmarish quality to it, not much happens in this episode. I mean, the clown shows up and scares him occasionally, but that's pretty much all that happens in this episode. In fact, I can probably sum it up in just 5 or 6 sentences. Sam acts like a prick. Clown scares him. Sam shits himself. Clown shows up again. Sam apologizes, clown gone. But despite my nitpicks, this episode still does have a very dreamlike tone to it that only helps add to the mindfuckery, and even gave it a slight Lynchian vibe in some areas. And now, on to my number one favorite, Are You Afraid of the Dark episode. Number 1. The Tale of the 13th Floor. And now, we've reached my number 1 favorite episode. This story tells the tale of two adoptive siblings named Karen and Billy, who are invited to a toy factory on the 13th floor of their apartment to help test out some new products. Now, they specifically only want Karen, which the reason for is revealed down the line. Anyway, once they arrive, Karen is taught how to perform telekinesis eventually. She is thrilled at first, but eventually realizes that the people running the place might not be human, and soon learns that they might have something perilous in mind for her after Billy is left unconscious by one of their machines, and one of them reveals their true identity. In my opinion, this episode is a better version of the Haunting Hour episode Intruders. For starters, Intruders had family drama that was handled so poorly. Thankfully, though, the family drama is kept to a minimum in this episode, so it didn't really have that bogging it down, and the characters are actually likable. Now, the main reason I compare this to Intruders is because of the twist, which I plan not to spoil, but holy shit, it is probably one of the best ones this show has done. This episode is also very subtle with its horror, yet still conveys an unnerving and off-putting tone. I mean, just the scenes taking place in the toy factory, which is probably some of the best set design I've seen on the show next to Final Wish and Dollmaker, are just so disconcerting since while it is bright and cheerful, the overall tone, along with the fact that there doesn't seem to be a lot of toys despite being a quote-unquote toy factory, just some strange animal figures on a conveyor belt that look more like erasers than actual toys, along with a sliding dice on the floor. You just get the idea that something is amiss the moment they walk in. I think it might have to do with the washed colors within the place, which do help add to the creepy tone, along with the fact that everything looks so innocent, which does nothing to help decrease the unsettling mood of the toy factory exhibits. And the scenes where one of the people in charge of the toy factory appears on Karen's TV still gives me such a strange feeling. Even to this day, it almost feels as though the episode is trying to communicate with me in some way. And it's just a very eerie scene overall. Great episode, pretty original idea, good setup, good pacing, fear from Haunting Hour, good twist, clever ideas, amazing set design. This episode has it all, baby. And that was my ranking of my top 5 favorite Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes. Despite the show's occasional cheesiness, it does hold up today in my opinion, and some of the episodes do manage to be pretty damn scary, especially the last few I mentioned. One drastic change that I do not like that they did in the recent remake, or whatever you want to call it, is that they got rid of the format, or whatever you want to call it, where the Midnight Society would introduce different stories, and each episode would be told by a different one, and you would see the story play out. Instead, it has them going on supernatural adventures together, which it would be fine if it was a different show, but the thing is, when people think of Are You Afraid of the Dark, most people tend to think anthological storytelling. You know, a different story taking place each week with different characters in a different scenario. So, taking away that aspect of the show, you know, something that a lot of people are already familiar with, just feels kind of weird. Besides, I want to see him throw that dust into the fire and watch it explode all psychedelic-like. Anyway, that was my top 5 ranking for my favorite Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and sub for more content.